Okay, so welcome back. This is just one last, I guess, just a last small, short session with some concluding remarks from two medical experts and an expert in microtechnology. Maybe some thoughts on what they've seen and how it relates to what they're doing. So I guess I can start with Professor Wolf.
Okay. Do you want us to use?
Yeah.
Can you hear better with this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks. It was a great day, and I think it's really good to have some team science going on with lots of different disciplines, and it seemed like this should really happen like this at the beginning of a technology development rather than at the end having produced something where you then go, oh, it's not going to work in a rat or a flatfish or a human. So I think it's good that we do this now. I suppose I came to this naively thinking there was something near to market. But that's a good point, because we can actually think about the context in which it operates. And I'm sort of repeating a bit of what I said before. So in terms of a clinical pathway, from my perspective, at the moment, that there seems to be, apart from in remote areas, very little need to get people into hospital much quicker. I think we need to, obviously, people need to understand what the symptoms of stroke are, and campaigns around that have been successful, but they need sustaining. And they, of course, won't work in different, especially low and middle income countries, quite so well. So I think, so having this in the back of an ambulance, I'd say forget it. Well, certainly at the moment, you couldn't put it in the back of an ambulance. And I suppose the issue for me is, when it came to it, how would this device be used in somebody who has got such a brain attack, and actually just physically putting it on, etc., particularly in an ambulance. So the access I don't think is the issue. I think the issue for me is, what is the agreement between this and the gold standard, be it probably a CT scan, maybe an MRI, but I'll leave that to my expert on my left to talk about that a bit. But unless you can prove it's as good as, this is not going to go any further for stroke. That would be a point, except you might say, well, actually, if you can do it in rural areas or in low and middle income countries, it has to be equivalent in terms of sensitivity, specificity. Otherwise, you could be doing harm. So I think that's the major thing. I think in terms of evolution of stroke, I think it's important in a research context that we do look at evolution in the acute period, and perhaps then stratify patients. Precision medicine is now what is happening in medicine. So if you can identify groups of individuals that you can then target for mechanisms and try new treatments, that would be good. So I think as a research tool, that would be good. But other than that, I think, as Tony said, it would not be of great benefit. It might be interesting, but not a great benefit. So I think that's a sort of few initial remarks.
Okay, thank you very much. David.
Well, I'm going to start more upbeat and say that I think this is a really exciting imaging tool if it works. CT is moderately expensive and uses radiation, and this is going to be more inexpensive and it doesn't use radiation. MRI has difficulties with practicability of getting the patient into the room and checking for safety with implants, and obviously issues with cost and specialist interpretation as well, and patients don't like it because it's being enclosed in a tunnel. And this is a wearable hat, potentially, that you can have that will give you the imaging data. But data is always easier to acquire than to know what to do with. I was trying to think of an engineering example, and I wondered if maybe the Boeing was a recent example where they had a sensor that told them that the attitude of the plane, whether it was pointing up or down, to prevent stalling. And the computer systems got conflicting information based on the sensors saying the plane was pointing up when it was really going flat, and it kept trying to force the nose down, and it crashed. The hurdles that this test has to overcome are, obviously, you've got sort of technical challenges of the physics of it. You've got the regulatory challenges that we've talked about. But some of the challenges that I can imagine are based around interpreting the data. And really, we're talking about sensitivity and specificity of the test. So sensitivity is I better get this right now with an expert next to me, but sensitivity is if you have the condition, how reliably does the test say you have it? And for hemorrhage, that's going to be important to have a high sensitivity, because the treatments, as we've said, for ischemic stroke and hemorrhagic stroke are different. If you have a hemorrhagic stroke, you want to stop any treatments the patient may be on that cause blood to be thinner and not to clot as well. And the specificity is really sort of more like the accuracy of the test. So if the test says you have an ischemic stroke, what is the probability that the patient has one? And I can imagine the problem there as well is that you can see from the CTs that I showed you, the very early changes when somebody has a stroke within the first hour or two can often be really quite subtle. And we're talking about very small changes in tissue density and water content, and maybe microwave absorption as well. And detecting hemorrhage is one thing, but saying whether it is a stroke or not a stroke, I think, is going to be another difficulty. And as I mentioned earlier, even with all the public information campaigns and the paramedics who are trained up and healthcare teams who are on alert in the hospitals, still up to a third of the patients that we see in hospital who are referred with a possible stroke don't actually have a stroke. They have something else wrong with them. And some of those challenges maybe will be addressed when we come to test the technology in animal models and things like that of ischemic stroke and things like that. But these are the things that need to be thought about earlier on as well.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Panos. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to attend this conference. I am a microwave engineer, and of course, I am seeing the problem quite differently from what has been just explained. You know, today we were concerned with the strokes, but more generally, the microwave community is working on so-called microwave-based imaging for medical applications. And in these few words, you have both microwave and you have medical imaging. And I think that we are really located at the crossroad between the microwave community and the medical community. And one of the major problems to solve is to make something, is to arrange a communication between the two communities. And I think that the big merit of this meeting today has been to join both microwave engineers and clinicians. Okay, I would like rapidly start with microwaves and microwaves with respect to medicine. Well, microwaves have been used or are used for medicine in different ways. You probably know that microwaves are more or less successfully already used in oncology via hyperthermia treatments or for ablation. But the case of imaging is quite different because it started much after other applications. Microwave imaging appeared, I would say, inadvertently in the 80s. You know, from the 80s until now, we have almost 40 years. And we are still trying to find a field of application where microwaves are effectively providing what we are expecting from them, that is, It's a non-ionizing radiation. It's supposed to be low cost, portable, and so on and so on. And it's true that a priori microwaves should provide these advantages at the condition that they are able to provide at least as good images as existing modalities. And maybe to make something a little bit better, because imaging companies are already fabricating, selling worldwide their own machines, and probably for them to invest in microwaves will represent an effort they seem not ready to do until now. So, in the case of stroke, which is a very good test case, I think, for microwaves, I think that we are maybe not so far from a result where we could consider that they are providing images with an acceptable clinical relevance. Okay, this is the situation today at time t, but what will happen within the next few years? And here are arriving the complications for at least, I think, two reasons. The first one is that microwave technology knows a quasi revolution in terms of technology development. And you just have to open some journals to see that 5G and all derived products will saturate our environment. So it's unimaginable that this microwave technology improvement will not impact the technology required to develop efficient microwave imaging system. So we are in a situation where the technology is not yet here, but we know that it will arrive soon. That's the first point. The second point is, I am not a physician, as I told you, but if you are looking to medical journals or journals in general, and after the nice presentation, the last nice presentation on artificial intelligence, so-called, okay, you can imagine that the medical imaging, and probably more deeply, the medical practice will be completely changing within the next few years. In such a way, we are in a situation, on an, I would say, unstable situation. And we have to try to anticipate the improvement of the microwave technology and the change in the medical practice. This could be considered as a big disadvantage or very risky, but on the other hand, if we are more optimistic, we can consider that it's, on the contrary, a very good moment to think at the best way to combine microwaves for medical imaging purposes. And I think that maybe, I know that for today patients, the problem has to be solved now. But I think that in microwave laboratories, for instance, we have to think a little bit in advance to what could be done in order to take profit of the situation I mentioned concerning the evolution of microtechnology and the change in medical practice. Okay.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.